Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of this Fleets in Charge webinar series. Really pleased to, not that I can see you, but really pleased that you're with us this morning. The first of our webinars is looking at Electrifying 2021, and we've got a really good lot of speakers for you to hear from this morning. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. This webinar is being recorded. All of our recordings are available on the BVRLA's website. Can I also ask that any questions from delegates come in via the chat on the right-hand side of your screen? And then just a reminder that all BVRLA meetings are held in accordance with the competition law. So attendees are reminded that failure to comply with the law may bring very serious consequences for them as individuals and also for their companies. And so we must refrain from exchanging any commercially sensitive or strategic information and avoiding those areas that are in red. So please no discussions on company prices, terms of sale, profit margins, future plans with individual companies, production, marketing plans, and we must avoid any discussion on matters relating to individual suppliers or any commercially sensitive information. But please do keep the conversation flowing and keep those questions coming in. Without further ado, there's been a lot happening in this decarbonisation space since we had the 2030 phase-out announcement. I'd like to welcome Phil Killingley to the stage. Phil is the Deputy Director for the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles and is going to give us an update on some of the government work in this area, which will hopefully set the context for today's event since the phase-out announcement. So Phil, welcome, and over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Can I just check you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, fantastic. So it's great to present to you today about what can only be described as the relentless rise in zero-emission vehicles in 2020, and from a government perspective on what happens now to accelerate progress and to support the emerging market. I'd like to thank BVRLA for having me today. I just wanted to say about BVRLA and its members that I think it's fair to say that over recent years, we've had excellent conversations with the organisation. And it's meant that our policy is grounded in reality. I hope you think. We don't necessarily always do what BVRLA members ask us to do, but it carries quite a lot of influence within government. And certainly when I'm explaining to ministers or others what the importance of BVRLA is, I can. There's a lot of credibility behind the sheer numbers of new vehicles. I use the statistic of 50% or more of the new vehicle market that you account for. So the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, as we're now known, no longer OZEV, has been around since 2009. And for a number of years, we've been waiting for this turning point. When is this turning point going to come in the market? And I think 2020 was that year, at least for cars. So you'll forgive me for doing a small jig of celebration, a metaphorical one, but we don't want to be complacent because we do have a mammoth task ahead of us. We're talking about 40 million cars and vans on UK roads that need to be transitioned to zero emission vehicles if we're going to meet our commitments by 2050. So that is a long way to go, but things are starting to move in the right direction. And I wanted to start with some statistics that emphasize that. You'll be familiar with many of them. On cars, ultra-low emission vehicles or plug-in vehicles have gone from 3 to 10.7% between 2019 and 2020. That's a big rise. And battery electric vehicles from 1.5 to 6.6%. And admittedly in a smaller car market, but even absolute sales have gone up markedly. And this is driven a lot by the company car regime, the benefit in kind rates, but also by the new car CO2 regulations, as well as hopefully we would like to think the other policies that OZEV has developed and introduced. There have been a lot more models on the market. We've now got over 100 plug-in models, and that's expanding rapidly. Vans is at an earlier stage, and we were just below 1% of market share in 2019, rising to just below 2 in the first 9 months of 2020. But even there, we're seeing rapid expansion in the last few months of 2020, and we can see that from our plug-in van orders, which are before the vehicles are registered. There are 11 new models on the market, including 9 larger vans, which accounts for the lion's share of the market. And we've got a lot of charge points coming online as well, 20,000 plus public charge points, nearly 4,000 rapid, including increasing numbers of ultra rapid, and 150,000 home and workplace charge points. So I think these statistics are starting to show that the market is turning, and it'll be really interesting to see what comes in 2021. I wanted to turn very quickly to why we're doing this. You'll know a lot of this already, but if I can recap very briefly, climate change, the UK is the first to legislate to get to net zero. We want to be leaders in the COP26 conversations this year and encourage other countries towards that. We've got a fifth of UK carbon emissions come from cars and vans alone, and transport is now the biggest sector. And we have interim carbon budgets, which are also legislated on the way to net zero that we need to meet. We've made a lot of progress on power, and now transport is the next thing that we need to address, along perhaps with homes, which might follow a little bit behind, to be able to continue the right pathway. And there's air quality emissions as well, and we know that transport is a big cause of poor air quality and the impacts on human health. So that's not just a side benefit, but a significant benefit that comes together with this zero emission vehicle agenda. Economic opportunity is huge. We're seeing jobs and investment in building the vehicles, the batteries, but also the charge points and the underlying energy systems. And the fourth area where electric vehicles are really going to help is to help the energy system transition, because batteries can provide that flexible storage for intermittent solar and wind powered electricity and reduce our dependence on foreign oil. So because of that, we've got this 2050 goal, which is that almost all cars and vans in the entire fleet will be zero emission. And the Committee on Climate Change advised that we need to bring forward our 2040 phase out for the new cars and vans. So that was done in November through the PM's 10-point plan. And it's 2030 for conventional vehicles, 2035, all new cars and vans must be zero emission at the tailpipe, and we'll be consulting on the interim period. And a little word on that, we will be consulting quite soon on that position. We want to lock it down quite soon, the answer, because vehicle manufacturers need to know for the products that they're going to be bringing to market, that's not that far away in vehicle manufacturing planning terms. So we'll be thinking about questions such as what should be the metric for establishing what significant zero emission capability should be to define what can be sold in that 5-year period. What threshold should we have on that metric, and what are the impacts going to be, because we're thinking about not just the environment but also industry and consumers. So we'll look forward to talking more to BVRLA and members about that consultation as it comes out. It's likely that we'll also consult at the same time on the general regulatory framework to achieve our carbon goals and the phase out date for transport for cars and vans. So that's sort of some general high level principles around what the regulatory framework should be. And again, we said last year that that would be in the coming months. So I think you can expect that relatively soon. The other thing that we're going to be doing, again, hopefully soon, is announcing another consultation on heavy goods vehicles, where we've committed to consult on the phase out date for diesel HGVs. There's no date yet attached for what that phase out date might be, but that too will be an interesting conversation. So at the same time as publishing these long-term phase out dates, really important that we set out what the plan is to get there. And in 2021, we will publish a delivery plan setting out how we'll do that for cars and vans, what the roadmap is for the targets, what the policies and milestones are. That's likely to be an iterative thing. To start with, I think we'll focus more on the near term than the longer term. But really what this does is it enables a conversation with you, with other parts of industry, about what are the priorities, what are the gaps that are emerging in support, and how do we address those jointly, because there's inevitably, as the market comes on stronger, there's a balance between what the role of government should be and what the role of industry should be. It is only fair to manage expectations. I think we wouldn't want to say that the production of a delivery plan means that every single policy or funding ask from the industry will be in that plan, but we will expect to cover lots of different themes in it, like infrastructure, the vehicle market and incentives, cars and vans, and the second-hand market. And we've got a deep dive into it with BVRLA and some members later today. A little bit of time on challenges now. We have some upfront cost issues in the market. It's about a 13k gap between electric and petrol and diesel equivalents, and that's both for cars and for vans. It's about the same gap on average. We have grants, as you know, for plug-in car and van grants, which are funded out to financial year 22-23 to address that gap. We've also got very, very significant company car and salary sacrifice benefit in kind beneficial rates, so 0% this tax year, 1% next year, and 2% for the 3 years after that. And I know that kind of 5-year, 4-year now, that stretch provides welcome certainty for the industry. There's zero vehicle excise duty, and the operational savings are really significant, all to offset that price gap. Personally, I'm very much addicted to my 1p per mile overnight rate that I have Fiona from Octopus, who's presenting later, to thank for. So the choice is improving. We've got electric ranges increasing. We'll expect price reductions to come over time, particularly as battery technology improves and economies of scale are brought to market. And announcements like the one we had from Ford, as well as JLR, I think last week, are really important milestones along that way. So that was very welcome. I think there's also a big role for education and for nudges to play here, because it's not just about obviously incentives really important, but to be able to show people quite what those upfront costs are, but also offset against the operational savings. So last year we brought in new showroom car labels to emphasize the long term, the total cost of ownership, not just the upfront cost. And fleets are a very good place to start with that philosophy, because I know there's more regard to the total cost of ownership and the savings that can come. Infrastructure is, if I had to choose one area that's going to be the biggest focus for OZEV this year, it would be that. We've announced just last weekend improvements to the electric vehicle and home charge scheme and the workplace charging scheme. So they'll be expanded in scope, and we'll be consulting on that later this year. For home charge, that'll bring in flats, it'll bring in rental accommodation and also leasehold properties. And for workplace, it'll mean that we can look not just at businesses providing charge points for their staff, but also for customers. So bring in places like B&Bs and town halls into the equation. There's doubling of the budget for those schemes. And they're extended till March 2022, I should say. The next thing we published last year, a vision for long distance charging, because this remains a significant barrier for many consumers. And we've got 6 ultra rapid charge points per motorway service area by 2023 and 6,000 across England by 2035. So that's a 950 million pot that we're going to be, at the moment, we're just developing the rules and the governance around that, how it should be spent, so that we can make sure it's spent properly and to the best effect. Building regulations, this is all new homes and non-residential developments to have a charge point where they've got an associated parking space. That's going to be taken forward later this year with regulations, I expect. On-street charging, we've, again this month, extended the budget for that to the next financial year. And we've got a new on-street scheme coming, which isn't just looking at the on-street lampposts and car parking spaces, but also it's providing a 90 million pot that might look at slightly larger scale solutions, such as urban rapid hubs and other major deployments. Consumer experience, another of charge points, another really important area. We just launched a consultation that is open until the 10th of April, so an 8-week consultation. That has had hundreds of responses already in the first weekend from electric vehicle drivers, not myself, but many others. We're looking at 4 key questions: ease of payment, including roaming solutions, a single payment metric. We've proposed pence per kilowatt hour to align with how we pay for electricity at home. Open availability of data, to make sure we have data on charge points available for app developers and to be integrated, for instance, into sat-nav systems. And reliability, we're talking about a 99% minimum and having 24/7 helplines. And there are some emerging areas as well, like disabled access to charge points, weatherproofing and lighting, and signage to charge points that users of electric vehicles will recognise as some pinch points. So that is all with a view to regulating on at least some of those areas in autumn 2021, subject to parliamentary time. We're also putting lots of millions of pounds of research and development into innovative on-street solutions, wireless charging and vehicle to grid, looking at the solutions of the future. Finally, I just wanted to touch on the second-hand car market. This, for us, increasing confidence in that's going to be super important over the coming years. Now we have, you think about that 108,000 battery electric vehicles sold in 2020, that will be coming onto the second-hand market in a few years. Second-hand market for EVs will increase above the level of sales of the first-hand market. And it will help the new car market if there is that confidence there. So we're talking to BVRLA about that. We're watching what's going on around the world in other places, particularly California, which is setting some good leadership on this. They're doing some interesting things like requiring standard consumer access to data about battery condition. They're also having a service information requirement, so you can take your EV to be serviced at any garage rather than just a branded garage. So they're things that we're watching with interest and thinking about what we might need in the UK. So you can see an awful lot going on, 2.5 billion being invested, not counting the tax measures, lots of policy measures to back that up and some regulations. OZEV is getting increasingly busy. We're expanding as a policy unit within government to help with that. At that stage, I think I'll be quiet and say thank you for listening and look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Phil. We have had a couple of questions come in. Before I turn to those, I guess one of the big questions that I would like to ask is, you know, you've really set the scene now, and there's obviously a lot going on. Are there any particular trends that you're seeing this year that you're really excited about?
So I think the two that I'm really excited about, I'd say, would be vans on the one hand. As I said, I think for cars, the turning point year felt like it was last year, and we've not yet seen that for vans, but I think with the models coming on board and the commitment from some really large fleets, and you'll have seen some stuff in the news about this, I think we're going to see the numbers increase. I may be wrong, but that is a really significant development for me in 2021. And the second area is charging infrastructure and that consumer experience, which has been a problem for many early adopters of EVs. People have sort of done electric driving despite the charging experience in some cases, and to see that transformed through the consultation, any measures we take forward after that, will I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Thanks for that, Phil. Okay, so I'm just looking, having a scan through some of the comments. We've had one question come in, which is around ELCVs and the fact that they still have relatively limited real life range. And therefore, is there a risk that 2030 could force some of those LCV operators into FEV range extender EVs for drivers who do those longer journeys?
Mm-hmm. I suppose it'll be interesting to see what happens between now and 2030, because when we look at the market in 2021 and the ranges of the vehicles, in many cases they're lower than they are for cars, for some cars anyway. But by 2030, I'd hope that we'll have products on the market that can do a lot more. Undoubtedly, though, there will still be use cases where the range isn't enough, and so I think it's interesting to see vehicle manufacturers look at alternative technology solutions, and ones that I've heard talked about are range extenders. I know LEVC has been is just starting to get to market. It's electric van. It's got a range of about 60 miles. but also things like hydrogen range extenders, so battery electric vehicle with a hydrogen fuel cell backup. So yeah, they may be really good solutions for the interim, but it's 2035 that we need vehicles to be fully zero emission at the tailpipe rather than 2030.
Thanks, Phil. And I've got another question here that says, and this is from Dave Bushnell, that says, whilst we welcome the investment in grants, does this mean they will cease from March 2022? OZEV focuses predominantly on the first user. How will you encourage the used buyer?
Okay, so I'll take those in turn. The first thing is that we've committed to having those grants until at least 22-23, which is the financial year, April to March. So it goes beyond March 2022, certainly. And the second thing there on, I should say we've also not said that the grants will end at that point. So that's the funding that we've got available for those grants at this stage. The second point on the used buyer, I mean, there are incentives in the used market. I think when I look at this question, I think the biggest thing that we can do for the used market at the moment is to get a used vehicle was once a new vehicle. We need to make sure that there is a decent stock of new vehicles coming onto the market to be able to give sufficient choice and volume in the used market. I recognise there are questions there around residual values, but measures like the company car tax and the plug-in car grant, whilst targeting the new market, are then really important for the used market because it gets those volumes. We offer the zero vehicle excise duty, which applies to the used market, the EVHS scheme, all of the charge point work that we're doing, that's relevant, and the operational savings that you get. So there is a lot in terms of incentives for the used market as well. I think, as I say, we'll be looking to see what more we can do to support the used market, particularly some of those things around battery condition, but always open to ideas about what more we should be doing.
Thanks, Phil. And I know that's an area that we're certainly interested in gathering members' views and feeding back into OZEV. So thank you very much. I think that stimulated quite a lot of chat that's going on. Thanks ever so much. And yeah, we continue to work closely with you as things evolve. Thanks, Phil.
Great. Thank you very much.
So next this morning, we have Mike Potter, who's the Managing Director for Drive Electric. And Mike's going to be presenting on forecasts that they've produced for battery electric vehicles this year. Good morning, Mike. Over to you.
Morning, everyone. How are we doing? So I'd like to say thanks very much to the BVRLA for inviting me to go through some of these numbers this morning. Let me just share the screen. So just very briefly, Drive Electric, it was actually formed many years ago as Fleet Drive. Over the past 12 years, we've modified the business quite a bit, and it sounds a bit trite, but we really mean it when we say our purpose is to help as many people get to as close to net zero as possible. It's just that our chosen method of doing that is to use vehicles because that's what we know a lot about. And just to give you a very, very brief idea of what we've been up to and what the business is about. So we started on this path in 2008. We funded the first Tesla Roadster. We have about 3,500 electric cars and vans on the road now, and pretty much everything we do is battery electric car. We do have some legacy customers with ICE engines, particularly vans and things that still only work that way. We're very fortunate to have a couple of great partnerships. EDF and Lloyds Banking Group trust us to deal with customers that are looking for electric vehicles for them. We've got both fleet and personal business. There's some of the fleet people that we deal with, and we also, over the years, have been involved in energy projects and energy technology. So going back to 2013, we did something called Electric Avenue with SSE, and we then helped to conceive a project called Electric Nation, which is the biggest smart charging project in the world at the time. I probably should say that with a deep Clarkson voice, in the world. And out of that, we've made a separate business called CrowdCharge that looks at the intersection of electric vehicles and the energy system, because it's something that we are going to have to get right. And when we look at some of the uptake figures, that is something that which shouldn't be a problem, but just needs managing to make sure that it isn't in future. So got a scary graph for you. I'm here to talk about uptake of EVs, and you know, this is not the first time that we've had new technology come along. So this chart kind of crazily shows you all the different things, different technology that we've introduced into our life over the past century, really. And a little hard to see there. In a minute, we'll make this a little clearer. But in general, things don't follow a nice straight line in terms of uptake with a regular linear adoption. They tend to follow a sort of S-curve, a bit difficult to see from here, but this S-curve of introduction tends to catch on at a certain point when the product, and generally it's a product-led change. And with EVs, they've needed a bit of help from policy and whatever to get the ball rolling. But what really makes these things move in the market is the attractiveness, the price, convenience, whatever the new feature is that it brings to people. So, and this is becoming faster and faster, as you can see at the end. When we look at things like smartphones and particularly tablets, they took a matter of years to become, you know, very widely adopted. Obviously, cars are a little different because they're at higher cost value, but the principles of this, we believe, will apply to EVs and have been so far. So breaking that down, just a little bit of theory on this. So our predictions are a mixture of mathematical model that follows this S-curve that is generally used when looking at the stages that people go through. So we're probably into early adopters, well into early adopters, and just coming to the early majority, we think, when it comes to EVs. And what we've done is to take this mathematical model and we overlay it on actual numbers that are coming through or have come through so far, and to try and get the rate of change in the curve and some of the parts of the curve, like the radiuses of these adoption upticks. We've been fitting in the what's happened so far in terms of registration numbers in the UK, and it's UK only that we've been doing this for, to try and size this curve and see when it's going to happen. Well, obviously it's been made a little easier to see how long this goes on, because we now have a 2030 date for the phasing out of ICE vehicles. And in looking at the rest of the curve, we've tried also a tactical approach of examining all of the plans for different manufacturers. So we, you know, there's announcements coming every sort of day now from people like Ford and whatever, but we track all of the production plans for people just to make sure that the numbers kind of fit in, add them all up, and check that the maths fits what's going on in the real world as well. So once we've done that, we come up with this chart, which is the main topic for this morning. And what you'll see on here is the light blue bars are the pure mathematical version of uptake that we've modeled, and then the darker blue bars are a more tactical approach. So we kind of run out of that in 2026. You can see from there on, we think that that's level. And this technique enabled us to successfully forecast around 100,000 for 2020. We had it pegged at 98. It was 108. That looked a bit dubious at the beginning of the year, I have to say, when we made that prediction, especially as the year before was 33,000. Year before that, I think, was around 15,000. So, we're starting to see a really strong movement in the uptake of EVs. We believe this is much more about product, and people buy things because they're good, they're cheaper, better to use, or whatever. And this is one of the great things about EVs that I think anyone that uses them can agree on, that the product is great. We have a few issues about range and recharging, but they are becoming less of an impact as we go on. And we have a mantra in Drive Electric that range anxiety is something that is only experienced by people that don't drive EVs. People that drive EVs take about 10 days to 2 weeks to have that banished from their life. The other one feature on here that there's a few things to point out. If this is correct, then by 2025 we'll be hitting about 1 million BEV registrations a year. And we also believe that car ownership will decline gradually over the next period. There's not so much, this is much more of a finger in the air figure at the moment. We aim to do some more work on it, but we believe because EVs last longer, we won't register so many cars a year. We see them at about 20-year life cycle, whereas ICE cars are 14. And also more utilization of the assets through car sharing and other schemes we think are going to become a feature. And eventually, once they drive themselves, obviously that utilization is going to go crazy because you're not relying on humans to actually do that. So we see overall, and you'll notice that the chart starts to go down a bit, that we think overall registrations will start to decline. We're already seeing this in uptake of licenses with younger people, for instance. So that chart obviously keeps going on because even from the day that we don't sell any more ICE vehicles, the ones that were sold in the year before will probably last 14 years, maybe a bit less. So it will take longer to actually get out of that. Probably 2042, we think we may be getting down to very small numbers of ICE vehicles. So I hope that's okay. If you've got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And if there's anything that we can help with, please let me know. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was really insightful. Couple of questions that have come into the chat, but again, I'm going to take my chairperson's prerogative and ask a question first. I'm keen to understand, in terms of the trends that you're seeing and that trajectory. We obviously heard from Phil Killingley at the start of this morning's session. If you had one ask of government that would enable you to meet that trajectory, what would it be?
Stick with the company car tax regime. I think we've all seen the effect that that's having, and it was interesting. I've made this point a few times before. Used cars, there are six times used cars to every new car sold as transactions out there. We need to create a lot of used cars so that we can spread this to people that perhaps haven't got the money to buy new ones. The company car sector is fantastic at taking new cars and turning them into used cars. I know it does a lot of other things, Catherine, but it's one way in which companies can spend money on that early depreciation in a way that no one else can, and will take those chances. So I think it's really essential and serves another purpose to get things moving. So keeping that benefit in place, I think, is really important for a good, perhaps for another 8 years or whatever, to make sure that's still coming through. So yeah.
And on that sort of second-hand market question, Phil mentioned it, and it's something that we're actively looking at as well. I think that there is a concern amongst some of our members that with such an influx of electric vehicles, will there be the demand from a used market in sort of 3-4 years' time? Is there anything that you think we can do to sort of stimulate that second-hand market?
My personal view, one thing people may not know, I used to run the disposals at Lex Vehicle Leasing, as it was then, a long time ago, because I'm very old now. And I think the market will look after itself. Sorry, that's a bit of a glib statement, I know, but when you see the uptake and you realise that you've got to sell 6 times used vehicles to every one new one, the shortage of cars will probably take care of itself. We are seeing, I know, we've been through some very odd times, and we're seeing some shortfalls on some cars, I imagine, we've seen it in some of the fleet going back. But the early cars are very expensive cars. Some of those cars, like Model S, I-Pace, really expensive cars, and we were all looking for, 40,000-50,000 pound used cars to come out of it. And I think that's more of the problem that we're seeing. When it comes to vans and things, the market's still very buoyant and the values are great. So I think it'll look after itself. There are some anomalies around at the moment, however.
Thanks, Mike. And one final question, because I'm conscious of time, which is coming from James Davis, which is, are you also modelling van BEV registrations?
Not particularly, no. It's been such a small market. Trying to extrapolate the that S-curve off of the numbers is difficult. So in general, we kind of think it's just lagging a little bit, when we're looking at it for business planning, but not particularly, no.
Okay, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights with us this morning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
And next, I'd like to ask our panelists to join us. So we have Paul Kirby from Vanarama, James Taylor from Zipcar, Fiona from Octopus, and we also have Scott from Autohorn. If you'd all like to put your cameras on. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Morning.
So hopefully we'll get Fiona as well. Just while we're waiting for Fiona, just a reminder to the audience to keep your questions coming in. If you do have specific questions for the panelists, please just make a note of who they are, and then I can obviously direct them in the right direction. To get us started, I'm keen to sort of ask you all, really, this is very much about electrifying 2021. So keen to hear from each of you as to where you are on the journey to electrifying 2021 and what you see as the main challenges and opportunities for this year. So maybe if I can start with you, Fiona.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, you've had two brilliant speakers, so I really agree a lot with Phil and also with Mike. So I think we will see a lot more vans coming to market. I think we're already seeing that, and I think we're seeing greater uptake. There's loads more different vehicles, generally cars too, and so that's going to continue to drive that. There's greater interest across consumers and drivers, as well as on the fleet side. And to Mike's point, the company car tax regime is brilliant and is making a massive difference. That and the salary sacrifice scheme that goes with it, too, that Phil was talking about, all of those things are making it a really great environment for making that switch to clean green cars and clean green vans.
Thanks, Fiona. And perhaps if we can turn to you next, James.
Yeah, I mean, at Zipcar, we set out a vision to be fully electric by 2025 and kind of, I suppose, made our first step towards that 2 years ago with our adding EVs to our flex fleet. That now accounts for about 30% of the fleet, and we've seen just real interest from members. They're actually joining to, anecdotally, to take an EV with us. So far in those 2 years, we've had over 60,000 members that have driven EV, and I think, as we look forward to the rest of 2021, and see that growing even further. We've got plans to bring more EVs into the fleet, bring more members to kind of break that link with the private car. And I think that's what that's kind of a trend that we've been seeing kind of the last year. With the pandemic, and I think people are, there's still a nervousness of taking public transport. People are looking at alternatives, and we want to be there to kind of meet that demand and get people into an EV and a shared EV.
Thanks, James. And Paul, to you next.
Well, as you know, I'm very much focused on the van sector, so it was particularly encouraging to hear Phil mentioning the van sector and really kind of picking that up. And I think just that change in perception of a van as 1 in 10 to sort of 30% of the inner city emissions is something that we really need to grasp. And for me, acceleration in the van market is all about testing and learning, and spreading the love, if you like. So there's a lot of key fleets leading the charge, and I I'm really excited to see the numbers of vans that are getting out on the road, and that can only really happen in the big fleets. But that test and learn process, that education process, that's going to grow in 2021, particularly for commercial vehicles, is very exciting. And at Vanarama, we're seeing lots of inquiries, but lots of questions. We did a survey last year where somewhere near 80 or 90% of people would consider an electric vehicle for their next vehicle, but over 80%, 83% didn't know enough to make a decision. And that is really key, that test and learn process that everybody needs to have. It's easy for cars, not so easy for vans.
Thanks, Paul. And I was going to ask the same question to Scott, but I don't know if we've lost Scott. Are you there? I'll wait a few. Oh, hang on. Yeah,
yes.
Scott.
Sorry about that, technical issues. Sorry, I just had to log off. I missed the question, Catherine.
So the question is, in terms of Electrifying 2021, where are you on that journey, and what do you see as the main challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, we're quite far down the road with that. As a business, we've been an early adopter of EV vehicles and within our fleet. What the challenges that we've got is supply. It's education of customers, making sure that they're aware of the great things that you can do with EVs, but also we need everything else to catch up with where we are. It's the infrastructure, the ease of charging. We need to. The whole industry needs to get together and work together to make it an easy customer journey, and then that will really make us see a difference to it.
And Scott, I'm going to stick with you for a moment. So we've spoken a lot, and when we put in our sort of phase out consultation response, we focused a lot on rental and some of the challenges. But I know, you are a little bit further down that journey. What was the biggest challenge that you had to overcome, and how have you managed to take people on that journey with you, and is there more you think you can do to do that?
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge was the customer's perception of what an EV vehicle was, and that they were so that they didn't have any knowledge about how they worked. How did they charge them? How far would they go? What was the realistic term? So we're based in York. It was a great city for people coming to visit. And I'm sure it will be again soon. But yeah, we just had to do a lot of training with our staff. Our staff then questioned our customers. We gave them the belief, we gave them the knowledge around what they can and can't do with the vehicles. And slowly but surely, our EV uptake became more and more and more. And it was amazing, the feedback that we were getting from our customers around how they never knew this, they never knew that. It was really good. I'm sure I wish I had figures, but I'm sure we've converted many of our customers into being drivers permanently of EV vehicles. But it's the education that's the biggest thing that we found. If we spent a long time training our staff to make sure that they were the most knowledgeable people around the particular EVs that we had at the time, which were B-class Mercedes, and that allowed us to talk confidently about our product and give our customers the confidence to use those as well.
And Paul, maybe if I turn to you and ask a similar sort of question, obviously from the van side, how is that customer sentiment playing out, and are there sort of key issues that we have to overcome in terms of encouraging people? You're on mute, Paul.
So go on, who shouted bingo? The sentiment for vans is really positive. I spend a lot of time driving vans, believe it or not, electric ones, of course, and I've got one on my drive at the moment. And the reality is, people love to stop and talk about electric vans, and people that are engineers, they're in agriculture, they're delivery drivers, everybody is really interested. Of course, there are some real challenges. The range, whilst I think is much less a challenge than it was, say, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, with ranges sort of in excess of 130, 140, 150 miles, certainly in real world terms as well, from my experience of driving them, is it is becoming less, but I think the charging is the concern. And how do I charge it? How quickly can I charge it? Where can I charge it? And whilst this is being addressed, it's being addressed with cars in mind. It's not being addressed necessarily entirely with vans in mind, except workplace depot charging and things like that. But then you've got the infrastructure works. So you begin to go down a bit of a rabbit hole in terms of energizing your fleet, as it were. But the sentiment is really positive, and what we see with global action plans, the Clean Van Commitment, which is fantastic, some big companies signing up to major developments, others just investing, snaffling up every EV that is out there on the market at the moment. Is great to see. So there is a lot of intent and a lot of purpose. I think the challenges lie on keeping them moving, because if a van stops moving, it stops earning.
Thanks, Paul. And Fiona, a question for you. As an energy supplier that I suppose is entering this space, how are you looking at things in a slightly different way? And I guess are there more things that you're doing, and how does it play out in terms of how you're going to enter the sort of vehicle market, and will you use that energy experience to help move people in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think building on what Scott and Paul have both said, that the education piece is really important, and helping drivers and fleet managers and everyone else understand what that charging might look like is really important and really helpful as people make that switch and think about making that switch. So on the energy side of the business, so those of you that don't know Octopus EV is one member of the Octopus Energy Group. So there's an Octopus Energy residential energy supplier part of the business. There's a business part, which not only just supplies businesses, but also has tariffs for fleets and for charge point operators, and actually has now brought out an electric use network card. So that is a roaming card that you can use on lots of different public networks to try and make that very seamless. And actually has gone further and started doing fleet energy charging propositions as well, so that you can have, say, dashboards for your fleet to be able to manage the charging across that fleet, whether they're charging at home, at work, or on those public networks. So actually across the energy side, we're really looking at all of that, and can do everything now from the installs through to that energy supply and the tech and the insight. So really trying to look at those pain points as people are making that switch, and how do we make it really seamless and really easy. And then obviously on the vehicle side too, then really bringing it together with bundles. So for example, if you take our salary sacrifice scheme, there's a part where, a lot of people get their charge point from us as well, and get the installation of the charge point at home, also get an energy tariff where they can charge up at low rates overnight, and then with seamless smart charging to go with that. And actually our team then can talk about everything end to end. So the car, the charging, and the energy supply.
Thanks, Fiona. And James, on that sort of education and that customer sentiment bit, you are a way down the line. You've been doing this for a while. Did you have to encourage people to take the EVs, and how did you do that? Or did you find that by providing them, the appetite sort of increased as a result? It's sort of a chicken and egg.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think for car generally, we kind of sell ourselves on being, hassle-free. It's kind of access to a car without the cost hassle of ownership. And I think it was trying to bring some of that to our EV fleet. So, how can we make it as simple and as easy to use? And initially what we've done is we've managed all the charging. So we've taken that hassle and that kind of step out of it. And I think that's where kind of education going forward will be key. When we start to get members doing some of that charging, when the infrastructure is in place to allow us to do that, then I think the education is going to be huge, and it'll be a real challenge, I guess, for us to kind of look at how we can continue to educate members around that. I think from the vehicles themselves, there's just, to the points before, there's just this appetite to try EVs, and we have them at the same cost as our petrol vehicles, so it's not more expensive to use EVs, and we've just seen, since we introduced them, just the interest grow and grow, and I think there's been less need for education there. It's just letting them know that we've got EVs in the fleet, and then that really drives the interest that people want to try it.
Thanks, James. And, Phil spoke earlier about the opportunities for BVRLA members to get involved in shaping some of the policies. And the big thing that we're excited about is the delivery plan. So if you were to sort of influence the shape of that delivery plan going forward, what would be an absolute must? Maybe, Paul, if I could start with you. And you're muted again.
Embarrassing doubly, because I was actually typing a response to James Davis and didn't hear your question. So I'm a man, I can't do two things at once. I do apologise.
And I'm trying to remember what my question was. I was around the delivery plan, and if we're able to sort of shape the delivery plan, what would your key ask be?
Yeah, my key ask. So I with everybody on this panel is very excited about the BIK benefits of cars. I mean, that's a great driver, right? And yes, finally we've got 0 BIK on vans from April this year. Yes. So van drivers can enjoy the same benefit, particularly as they earn traditionally less than some of these nice cars that are out there, and that parity has been missing for some time. And I think that is some of the big challenge. The cost of the larger vans in particular is cost prohibitive at the moment. Yes, there's talk of vans coming out on the market that will match their ICE counterparts, new to market entrants. So that will be exciting, and that will be a driver. But I think there's something missing in terms of that support to energize the SME markets over the line, because the van grants themselves are not bringing that parity. I think the ULEZ will make a difference, and the congestion zones and the exclusion zones for cities and stuff like that. So for me, it's how do we get people out of their ICE vans into electric vans, considering the significant incentive. Now, I'm going to be a cynic here and say that most people are buying electric vehicles because it's like a 5 or 10 grand pay rise. When you count the taxation, the van drivers are not getting that, and the fleets are not getting that. In effect, they're getting a little bit of money off the front, and the rental comes down a little bit if they lease it. But that and electrifying the public sectors, because I mean, we provide an electric charge point with every electric vehicle we sell, but for a van driver, that's not necessarily something that they can access easily. So that on street or in the public domain charging, which is at a rate that is fair and equitable to the likes of the wonderful tariffs that are out there, some represented on this panel, that make it very cost effective. We're going to end up with a two-tier society if we don't address that public charging cost, for people that don't have home charging. So I think, and that's the van population very much so. So that would be my answer for that. And I'm rambling on, so I'll shut up.
Thank you, Paul. And then on that sort of ability to use the sort of public charging infrastructure, James, I'm guessing that's quite a big deal for you as well. And Scott, if you want to follow on from James, but is that sort of the key focus of the delivery plan you think should be on that infrastructure and ability to sort of charge?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for me, what's been missing is the kind of strategy around the charging infrastructure. What do we want the infrastructure to look like in the UK? Is it a charge point on every street? Is it? I've not seen that clarity yet, and I think it's been very much focused on residential charging infrastructure and less focused on what fleets need, or particularly from my perspective, what car clubs need. For me, it's important we get the cars charged as quickly as possible, so the back available to rent for our members. So yeah, I think that there needs to be that plan around how they're going to deliver that infrastructure, and recognising the type of vehicles and users that are going to be using it. So it's there's a mix of charging infrastructure. I don't think it's one size that fits all. And
Scott, anything to add to that?
It's just we need to simplify it. That's the biggest thing. I have about 20 apps on my phone for different charge points, and I'm sure there's probably 50 of them, all charging different prices, all potluck, whether it's work and not, or whoever. Let's make it simple. Let's make it so that anybody can go and charge their vehicle at any charge point, wherever they are, whoever they use. And actually we may see you know, that message will just start flowing.
And Fiona, finally to you, with the, I guess, 2 hats on in some respects.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of want to send Scott an electric juice network card so that you can start to consolidate some of those charge point operators at least. But you know, I think there's a couple of things going on, which is the charging at home is a lot cheaper. It tends to be obviously at slower rates compared to you see in rapids, but the cost of putting in a charge point at home is, say, £1,000, you know, and then you get the government grant off it, versus say putting £45,000-50,000 to put in a rapid charger. And it's, you know, if you're going even faster than 50 kilowatts, then it's going to be even more expensive. So actually, what I love about our society is that we do have market economics, which means that people will be innovating around that, around how can we unlock some of those other charge points, whether they're homes or other kind of destinations, so that those van drivers can start to access lower cost charging. I think there are challenges around, so booking and confidence. You know, when you're using it for your work, you really do need to know that you're going to be able to get access to that site. You're going to be able to get access to that charge point. Can I book it in advance? All that kind of stuff. But I think we'll see a lot of innovation over that in the next couple of years. I'm quite excited to see what's coming from that space. I think in terms of policy from a vehicle perspective, again, building on lots of points already, the BIK has been absolutely influential there. I'm really excited about the fact it's coming alongside with vans as well. That's great. And just consistency there. Consistency, confidence around that low BIK rate. In fact, if anything, I'd love to see it just keep being at 0 because it's such a simple message. And I think to Scott's point, simplicity is so valuable. And it's really, really helped drive that push. And bear in mind that we're still less than 1% of the kind of, you know, UK car park is BEV at the minute. So it's still very, very low numbers relative to all of the different vehicles that are on the road and being taxed and so forth. So actually, we can make a high impact in kind of getting it out there, getting people to see those vehicles, talk about those vehicles, get excited about them, and really start to move along the S-curve that Mike was showing us earlier. And as soon as we can like push into those other bits, then it will take itself. It will carry itself at that point.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And there's a couple of questions coming into the chat, but unfortunately we're out of time. So feel free to chat amongst yourselves and answer some of those questions that have come through. But thank you all so much for taking the time to join us this morning. Thanks a lot. So just to start to wrap up today's session, I just wanted to give you a bit of an update in terms of some of the work that the BVRLA is engaged in. So we heard from Phil earlier in relation to the amount of work that's coming out of OZEV. There are a number of consultations that we will be responding to. Since we had the 2030 announcement, we've been doing quite a lot, particularly on the connection side. So we've worked very closely with the Department for Business, supported by OZEV, to produce some, I think, much needed guidance, which centralises a lot of the information that's out there and also provides a process map, which will hopefully help fleet operators navigate their way through what can be quite a complex process. Phil mentioned the consumer experience consultation, so we'll be working with members on that. And then there's a number of things that we're expecting, not just from OZEV, but from the FT as well. So there's going to be the green paper and also the transport decarbonisation plan. And then OZEV are also working on the national infrastructure strategy. And we've spoken a lot about the delivery plan. We have a session running just after this morning's session with our EV working group, where we're going to be working through the delivery plan and hopefully, you know, allowing members to have an early influence into that. So if you'd like any more information on the EV working group and how to get involved, please do contact me at catherine@bvrla.co.uk. And then, Fran, if you just go to the final slide, flick over that one. We've spoken quite a lot about the delivery plan. So the next Industry Outlook webinar series will be held on Tuesday, the 16th of March at 9 AM. You can register for that at the BVRLA's website. We have our next Fleets in Charge webinar on the 28th of April. And again at 9 o'clock. And again, please do register. The theme of that one is going to be on supplying 2030. And then just to wrap up today, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all our speakers, All webinars are recorded and are available on our website. You can also see our events calendar on the website for the remainder of events that we're going to be running through the year. Just a quick reminder that if you are travelling abroad, need information on VE 103s or fair wear and tear, this can also be found on our website. And I'm just going to leave you with a short video that tells you a little bit about a new and exciting course that we're running on EVs. Thank you ever so much, and hopefully see you soon.